FDA panel has unanimously voted to recommend Moderna's COVID-19 booster for emergency use for tens of millions of Americans. The recommendation only for those fully vaccinated with Moderna. Right now, Americans 65 and older, those with underlying medical conditions, and workers at high risk of the coronavirus would be eligible. The panel poring over safety information and reviewing data from Moderna that shows protection from the first two doses can wane over time. The final decision now in the hands of the FDA. Let's get right to NBC's Miguel Almaguer, who leads us off tonight.
Moving a major step toward authorization, tonight an FDA advisory panel says some Americans fully vaccinated with Moderna should get its booster. The unanimous recommendation, not yet greenlit by the CDC, applies to those 65 and older and others at higher risk of severe disease because of health conditions or exposure at their job.
I think we all expected a third shot was going to be prescribed for those who are high risk. The question here is, did the science appear to justify such a decision?
Providing documents full of data, Moderna argued the FDA should authorize its booster for recipients at least 6 months after their second dose, citing breakthrough infections and waning immunity over time. But the FDA notes even without a booster, vaccines still afford protection against severe COVID-19 disease and death in the United States.
There's been some pushback against Moderna because its efficacy against hospitalization remains high. So why the need for a booster?
The vaccines are still working for the vast majority of Americans. It's keeping people out of the hospital. It's keeping people from being infected. They're not in urgent need of a booster.
With nearly 70 million Americans already fully vaccinated with Moderna, those who qualify join the same group of Pfizer recipients who can also get a booster. With Moderna's original doses larger than Pfizer's, its third shot will be a half dose. Authorities saying today the data are not perfect, but these are extraordinary times. Today, the president again making the sell for boosters.
These boosters are free. I'll say it again, they're free, available, and convenient to get.
As Johnson & Johnson's case for a booster comes up tomorrow, tonight for millions vaccinated with Moderna, the extra dose of protection may soon be a shot away.
All right, Miguel Almaguer joins us now live. Miguel, as we saw with the process for Pfizer, this FDA vote isn't the final step in the process.
That's right, Tom. As you know, it's a complicated process. Now that the FDA advisory panel has agreed, the FDA itself still needs to sign off. Then a CDC advisory committee needs to make a recommendation likely next week before the CDC director can give the okay. So a few more hoops before the green light on a Moderna booster. Tom?
Miguel Almaguer leading us off on that breaking news tonight. Miguel, thank you. The FDA panel's recommendation for Moderna boosters will mean shots in arms for tens of millions of Americans. But the health experts are still weighing the best course of action for those who receive the single-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine. CNBC contributor Dr. Scott Gottlieb, he's the former FDA head, and he's the author of Uncontrolled Spread, Why COVID-19 Crushed Us and How We Can Defeat the Next Pandemic. Dr. Gottlieb, thanks for joining Top Story tonight. We do appreciate it. I want to drill down on that question Miguel posed in his story we just saw. When it comes to Moderna, where do you stand on boosters? Necessary or unnecessary? And what about in Americans under 65?
Well, look, I think in the data that we've seen out of Israel, and I serve on the board of Pfizer, which deployed its vaccine in Israel, so the data that's coming out of Israel is in reference to the Pfizer vaccine. We've seen with people who were vaccinated a long interval ago, and particularly among an older population, not just breakthrough infections, but also rising incidences of more symptomatic infections and some severe infections. So there is a suggestion in that Israeli data set that people who were vaccinated a long interval ago who are at risk from COVID disease, particularly older individuals, do benefit from boosters, not just in terms of a reduction in any infection, but also a reduction in symptomatic infection and a reduction in the risk of more severe infection. Now, U.S. health regulators aren't convinced of the Israeli data set, and I think that that's part of the conundrum here, that they don't think that the Israeli experience is fully transferable to the U.S. But I look at the Israeli data, and I think that the Israeli data, the Israeli experience is somewhat predictive of perhaps what we're going to experience here, because a lot of people in Israel were vaccinated a longer interval ago. The vaccine was deployed there more widely earlier than it was in the U.S.
And then Moderna boosters for under 65. What's your take on that?
Yeah, look, I think that the FDA is likely to make a decision across all the vaccines that's fairly consistent. And the fact that they've now authorized the boosters for those who've received the Pfizer vaccine, I think that they're going to follow suit with the Moderna vaccine. That's certainly what the advisory committee signaled today. I think CDC is likely to follow that recommendation. I think FDA is likely to side with the advisory committee. If you have boosters available to those who receive the Pfizer vaccine, I think that they have to make boosters also available to those who receive the Moderna vaccine.
Dr. Gottlieb, let's talk mixing and matching. That phrase can maybe scare people and confuse people. Do you think we'll get to a point where the FDA approves this and says it's okay to mix and match?
I think where we're likely to land with this is that the FDA is going to incorporate into the labels of the vaccines some safety data to advise physicians that there's no harmful effects if you do have substitutions in the marketplace. I think the recommendation is still likely to be that you get boosted with the vaccine that you previously received. But the mixing and matching data does seem to affirm that there's no safety issues. Now, albeit it's a small data set, but we also have data from other countries as well. And so we know there's going to be inadvertent substitutions in the marketplace, people who accidentally get the wrong vaccine. We know there's going to be people who have to get boosted with a different vaccine because of convenience, because they just can't access the original vaccine that they received. So you want to at least have enough safety data to inform those decisions. And that's where the NIH mixing and matching study, I think, is going to come into play.
All right, finally, on the pandemic and the Delta surge, you went on the record last week saying you felt this could be the last big wave in the U.S. You still feel that way?
I still do, but I think that this Delta wave has a ways to go. We've seen cases decline dramatically in the South, and that's bringing down the overall national average because big populous states like Texas and Florida are seeing big declines in cases. But we're seeing an epidemic now in the Midwest and the West, and I think the Northeast is not immune to some Delta upsurge, certainly not on par with what we saw in the South because of the higher vaccination rates here and higher rates of prior immunity from prior infection. But I still think the North is in for some kind of Delta wave before this is all over. Hopefully by Thanksgiving, we'll be coming out of this Delta infection. On the back end of that, prevalence should decline.
All right, we hope so. Dr. Gottlieb, we thank you for your time tonight. Also developing tonight, Alex Murdaugh, the scandal-ridden former South Carolina